Hey guys, in this video we'll be continuing with the Python video tutorials. We'll be going over lists and tuples. So this will be the starting of that part of the video series. So we'll just do a little bit of background information on what a list is in Python. So a list in Python is pretty much an array like in other languages. There are some differences that we'll discuss. So basically, before lists, I have to tell you about sequences. So a sequence in Python is an object that holds multiple lines of data stored one after the other. So that basically should be around what a sequence definition should be around the same sequence definition that you've probably heard of before or think of. When you think of a sequence, maybe you've heard them in numbers, math. So in computer science, it's the same thing pretty much, except we think of the whole sequence as an object with multiple items or elements of data. So they're usually in a fashion. In this case, they'll probably be in a linear fashion, right next to each other. So if you know, if you've watched my Java data structure series, you'll know that there's other fashions. There can be like trees, which are kind of in a different order, and stuff like that. So a sequence, so again, a tree isn't a linear sequence. It's a different kind of data structure. So a sequence is different. So a sequence is an object that contains multiple items of data. The items are stored in a sequence, one after the other. Python provides various ways to perform operations on the items or elements that are stored in a sequence. There are several different types of sequence objects in Python. So in this series, we'll look at two of the fundamental sequence types, lists and tuples. Both lists and tuples are sequences that can hold various types of data. The difference between lists and tuples is simple. A list is immutable, which means that a program can change its contents, but a tuple is immutable, which means that once it's created, it can't be changed or modified. So we'll explore some of the operations that you can perform on sequences. So we'll also include ways to access and manipulate their contents. So pretty much, so we'll start off with lists. So that's just the introduction to sequences. So basically, now we'll do the introduction to lists. So basically, a list is an object that contains multiple data items. Lists are mutable, which means that their contents can be changed during a program's execution. Furthermore, lists are dynamic data structures, meaning that items may be added to them or removed from them. You can use indexing, slicing, and various methods that we'll discuss to work with lists in a program. Lists are slightly different than lists in Java, for example. They're similar but different, so we'll discuss them. Again, they're based on arrays, so arrays are done with, if you're looking at the screen now, sorry for the long introduction, but I have to tell you that it's a little bit more complicated than what we've been working. So lists are basically a data structure. All the data is stored between these two square brackets. So imagine just having data and then storing it. Like I can store a string in here like apple. I can say here list. I can say str list points to apple. Now we have one string in our list. We'll go over these in a sec, don't worry, I'm just doing a quick example, but apple stored at index 0, list stored at index 0. The next list will be index 1. This, for example, we can have a pair here. And so on. You can continue. You can say we have grapes, and so on. You can keep adding strings to the list. In Python, I believe you can add multiple types to a list, which we'll discuss, which can be a little bit more complicated if you're used to other languages. That's pretty much the only difference. Well, one of the only differences is that lists in Python can have several types, so it can be slightly confusing. We'll discuss that in a minute. So just back to the notes here. Alright, so where were we? So we can use different methods to access the data, modify the data. A list is an object that contains multiple data items. Each item that is stored in a list is called an element. For example, in our str list that we have on the screen, apple is an element stored at index 0. So we can have we can have another list which is called even numbers. We can store ints in it, integers. We can just have like 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, etc. So the items or the elements, the list is enclosed in square brackets as we discussed, and separated by comma, and the elements are separated by commas. You can have a space or no space. So you can have a space here, no space. White space doesn't really matter as long as you have the comma. So after our even numbers statement executes, so even numbers points to, and then our square brackets 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24 separated by commas, closing the square bracket. The variable even numbers will reference the whole list. So we can have a list of strings as we discussed here. We can add another one. So our string list contains fruits, different kinds. You can continue to add a comma and another string. So again, the str list will point to the whole list. So a list can hold different types as I explained. So we can have a string in here. We can have strings in here. We can have some large number. We can have a float in here. So we can have an int. We can have a float. We can have another float. Anything, right? Any different types. You can make types. We'll talk about that later on. So this statement that we have for our string list now contains different types. This statement creates a list of strings, integers, and floating point numbers. After the statement executes, the string list will reference the whole list. So we can also use the print function to display an entire list. So I can print, for example, I can say print, I can just call this str list, print that out. So we have our list here, we printed it. As you can see, Python printed it with single quotes. I guess it likes single quotes more so than double quotes. I like double quotes. It works with, it's the same as other languages, so I just stick with basically just common things between different languages. Helps me cycle through multiple languages. I try to use the common functionalities of all of them. So whatever works for you. So as you can see, we have strings in here, and then at the end we have an int, a float, and another float. You can mix types. Doesn't matter in Python. Of course, in other languages like Java and C, that will cause an exception. That will cause a type mismatch, I believe. So moving on, Python also has a built-in list. So list like this. So it's like list like that with parentheses. It can convert certain types of objects to lists. If you can recall from before, earlier in the series, we had the range function, which returns an iterable, which is an object that holds a series. So an iterable is an object that holds a series of values that can be iterated over. So you can iterate over an iterable object as it holds a series of values. So you can use the statement, the range statement, or the function. Basically, we can use the following statement to convert the range function's iterable object to a list. So we can have our even numbers. We can call our even numbers list. So we can say do we have a numbers? Okay, whoops, sorry, I apologize, I missed something here for you guys. So just stepping back for a sec, so Python also has a built-in list function that can convert certain types of objects to lists, as we said. If you recall from chapter 4, the range function returns an iterable. So you can use a statement such as the following to convert the range function's iterable object to a list. So by that I mean we can have, so if I just, actually maybe I'll just move down here. So we can have like vals points to, so we can call the list function, and we can pass in a range. Oops, sorry, not in square brackets. So we're passing in, so again, we're just calling the list function. We're pointing a variable to it. Vals points to, we're calling the list function. We're basically concatenating this to another function. So list, and then in list we're going to pass the range, and then passing in 5 to range. So we're passing in the integer 5 to range, and we're passing in the range. So we're passing in the parameter 5 to the range function, and we're passing the range of 5 to the list function, and all that is pointing to vals. So val is going to store in the memory location vals, which vals points to a memory location hex code, which is a certain value, just a random string of hex code numbers, like hexadecimal numbers, and vals represents that string of hexadecimal numbers, and at that string of decimal numbers, hexadecimal numbers, or vals, which stands for that string of hexadecimal numbers, is going to store the list function, which is passing in the range function as parameters, which is passing in 5 to the range function. So hopefully that makes sense. Can be a little confusing. So when this statement executes, the following things happen. The range function is called with 5 passed as an argument. The function returns an iterable containing the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you remember, the range function returns, so it starts at 0 if you just pass in 1. If you just pass in 1 parameter, it's going to start from 0 to the value minus 1. So it'll range from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The iterable is passed as an argument to the list function. The list function returns the list. So it's going to be basically, it's going to convert that to a list. So what's really going to be printed is vals is going to point to a list, which is going to be in our list. We're going to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, in square brackets. So that's pretty much it. So the list 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is assigned to the vals variable. So moving on to where we were before we step back. If you guys can remember from the previous videos in the series, if you pass in 3 parameters to the range function, the first argument is the starting value, the second argument is the ending limit, and the third argument is the step value. So if we change, or if we have, maybe if we just delete that one then, and we have vals points to the list function, and then inside the list function we call the range function as a parameter, and inside the range function we pass in 1, 10, or 1, 20, and 2. So it starts at 1, ends at 20, and increments or adds, well, basically increments by 2. So if you know what increments means, it means basically adds from the starting value. So it starts at 1, so adds 2, goes to 3, then 5, I believe, so we'll just print that out. So we can print vals like that, save and run. You can say vals list, pass in vals. That should work. So you have our vowels list. Whoops, I printed out twice. How did I do that? So just printing that out, we have our string vowels list, and then we have our list printed beside it. So again, starts at 1, ends at 20. Just because it ends at 20 doesn't mean that value will be hit. Increments by 2, so the values are 1, then 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 2 is 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17, 19. Alright, so that was basically just some of the functionalities of a list. So moving on, in the next video we'll continue with the repetition operator. So hopefully you guys understand lists. So Python lists, again, they can hold different types of data. In the next video we'll continue with lists. So this was an introduction to lists. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, you can like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.